Jake Carter had never imagined his life would take such a strange turn. He had always been an ordinary man, working as a diplomat for Earth's government. His job usually meant visiting alien planets, negotiating trade deals, and trying to keep peace between human colonies and alien species. It wasn't glamorous, but it was important. However, today would be anything but ordinary. Jake had been on a routine diplomatic mission to the planet Zerithia, a world known for its beautiful landscapes and advanced alien culture. The Zerithians were known for their strict traditions and complex political system, but Jake was used to it. That was until he accidentally stumbled into a forbidden area on the planet, one that was off limits to everyone, including diplomats. He didn't know that his mistake would soon turn into a nightmare. It all started when Jake tried to visit the planet's consulate, a majestic building full of ancient artifacts and cultural treasures. As part of his diplomatic duties, Jake had been granted a tour, but when he wandered off alone to explore, he unknowingly entered a restricted area. That area turned out to be the private gardens of Consul Theric, the leader of Zerithia. Jake had no idea that the consul's granddaughters, Lyara and Sisera, were in the garden at that moment. The two women were training in martial arts, something rare for the women of their species. They were not only the granddaughters of the consul, but they were also known for their sharp minds and fierce independence. Their training was meant to prepare them for leadership roles within their society. When Jake walked into the garden, he was startled to find the two women practicing. They were not expecting a human to stumble upon them, and they did not take kindly to the intrusion. They demanded that he leave immediately, but Jake, caught in the moment, tried to explain he had simply lost his way. He wasn't sure what happened next, but one of them accidentally injured him in their frustration. The injury was minor, but it was enough to raise questions. The Zerithian guards quickly arrived on the scene. Rather than dismissing the event, the consul decided to take it further, using the incident as a political tool. The consul wasn't pleased, but he was a man of power and influence. And every action, no matter how small, had consequences. The next day, Jake found himself standing in an intergalactic court. The courtroom was vast, filled with representatives from many alien species, each with their own agendas and beliefs. The judges were imposing figures, their eyes glowing as they observed the proceedings. Jake tried to stand tall, though he felt like a fish out of water. The Zerithian High Court was about to announce the verdict, and Jake was nervous. The charges against him weren't clear, but he knew that he had to defend himself. His heart raced as he looked around the room, seeing the eyes of the alien leaders trained on him. Lyara and Sisera were there too, sitting in silence. The head judge, a tall and regal alien with smooth blue skin and black eyes, stood up to speak. Jake Carter, human representative of Earth. You are hereby found guilty of trespassing into a restricted area of Zerithia's consulate. The words hung in the air. Jake's heart sank, but he kept his composure. However, the judge continued. There are mitigating circumstances. Your actions have led to a unique situation. In accordance with the ancient laws of our people, you are hereby sentenced to marry the granddaughters of Consul Theric, Lyara, and Sisera, to restore the honor that was tarnished by your presence. Yikes. Jake's eyes widened. He had heard of such laws before in ancient traditions of forced marriages between powerful families to cement alliances or settle conflicts. But he never imagined it would happen to him. The words echoed in his mind as if they were a bad dream. The consul, sitting at the front, gave a stern nod. His face was expressionless, but Jake could sense the weight of his authority. You will become part of our family, the consul said in a deep voice. It is the only way to settle the matter. There will be no further debate. The room went silent, and Jake felt the eyes of everyone on him. Couldn't believe what he had just heard. A forced marriage to two alien women he had only just met? It sounded like something from a bad space opera, but here he was, the center of it all. Lyara and Sisera looked in their seats, looked at each other with mixed expressions. Jake couldn't read them, but he could sense the tension in the air. He had no choice. The verdict had been announced, and there was no way out. This was the price for his mistake. Jake tried to protest, to explain that he couldn't marry two women he barely knew. But the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. The matter is settled. Human will marry the granddaughters of the consul. The decision is final. As Jake left the courtroom, his mind was spinning. The world he knew suddenly felt distant and foreign. He'd come to Zarithia, hoping to complete his diplomatic mission, but now he was thrust into a situation beyond his control. Forced into a marriage with two alien women, he felt like a pawn in a game he didn't understand. Jake couldn't help but wonder why the consul had chosen such a harsh punishment. What was his true motive? How would he survive in this strange new world, bound by an ancient tradition he couldn't escape? One thing was certain, his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. Jake Carter had always been a man who liked to keep to himself, especially when it came to personal matters. He had never been one to share his emotions easily, and the idea of marrying two alien women, especially under such strange circumstances, made him uncomfortable. But the verdict had been announced, and he had no choice, had to go through with it. The next day, Jake found himself in the luxurious halls of the consulate, where the grand ceremony would soon take place. The building was magnificent, with tall, gleaming columns and bright windows that stretched from the floor to the ceiling. It was a far cry from anything Jake had seen back on Earth. Every corner seemed filled with alien technology, and yet it all felt distant and cold. As he walked through the halls, Jake couldn't help but feel out of place. He had spent his life among humans, surrounded by human customs and traditions. Now, here he was, in a foreign land, being forced into a marriage with two women he hardly knew. But what bothered him even more was the realization that the granddaughters of the consul, Liara and Sisera, were not just his future wives, they were powerful figures in their own right. Liara was the older of the two, with short, dark hair that framed her sharp features. She carried herself with confidence and grace, walking as if every step she took was carefully calculated. She was known for her intellect, and her reputation had spread across the galaxy. Even though she was the granddaughter of the consul, it was clear that Liara was much more than just her family name. She had a mind of her own, and she wasn't afraid to use it. Sisera, on the other hand, was younger and more unpredictable. With long flowing hair and a fiery spirit, she was a force to be reckoned with. Unlike her sister, Sisera wasn't afraid to speak her mind, often challenging others with her bold opinions. She had a sharp wit, and her ability to think on her feet made her an excellent strategist. But beneath her tough exterior, there was a vulnerability that few saw, a softness that Jake couldn't quite understand. As Jake met them for the first time in person, he was taken aback by how different they were from each other. Liara's calm, collected demeanor was a stark contrast to Sisera's fiery passion. The two women stood side by side, their eyes fixed on him, and Jake felt a sudden wave of nervousness wash over him. He had heard about the consul's granddaughters before, but seeing them in person was an entirely different experience. "We have a lot to talk about," Liara said, her voice smooth and measured. "I hope you're ready for what's to come." Jake nodded, unsure of how to respond. He had never been good at small talk, and this situation felt anything but small. The idea of being married to these women, especially in such a public way, was overwhelming. But as he looked into their eyes, he saw something that gave him a sense of hope, something that told him maybe, just maybe, this wasn't all as hopeless as it seemed. Sisera spoke next, her voice full of energy. "You may not have wanted this, but we don't have a choice either. We're stuck with this arrangement, just like you." Jake could sense the tension between them. It wasn't just about the marriage. It was a deeper connection that he didn't fully understand. But it was clear that Liara and Sisera had their own struggles with their family's expectations. The consul was a powerful man, and his influence reached far beyond the borders of Zarithia. His granddaughters were expected to follow in his footsteps, to uphold the family's honor and power. But that didn't mean they were happy with the path laid out for them. Liara crossed her arms, her gaze intense. "I didn't ask for this either," she said, her voice low. "But I don't get a choice. Neither of us does. Our lives have been planned for us since we were children." Jake realized that the granddaughters of the consul weren't as different from him as he had initially thought. They, too, were trapped by the expectations placed upon them by their family and their society. He had always thought that humans were the only ones burdened by the weight of tradition. Odd. But here in Zerithia, it seemed that every race had its own set of rules to follow. Sisara stepped forward, her eyes softening as she looked at Jake. We may not have chosen this, but we can at least try to make the best of it. Maybe we can find some way to make this marriage work for all of us. Jake was taken aback by her words. He had expected bitterness, anger, or maybe even resentment. But instead, he saw something entirely different. Hope. Sisera wasn't giving up on their situation. She wasn't accepting it, but she was willing to try. It was a small step, but it gave Jake a sense of comfort he hadn't expected. I'm not sure how we're supposed to make this work, Jake said quietly, his voice betraying his uncertainty. But I'm willing to try. Liara nodded, her expression softening slightly. We'll figure it out, Jake. Together. Room grew quiet as they all stood there, the weight of the situation sinking in. It wasn't going to be easy, but Jake realized that perhaps this marriage wasn't just about appeasing the Consul. It was about finding a way to break free from the constraints of tradition and create something new, something that could be theirs. As they continued to talk, Jake began to feel a glimmer of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, and there would be many challenges to face. But maybe, just maybe, this strange marriage could lead to something better, not just for him, but for Liara, Sisera, and the galaxy as a whole. Jake Carter sat in the grand dining hall of the Zerithian consulate, trying to get used to his new surroundings. The walls were decorated with intricate alien art, and the air smelled faintly of sweet spices. He wasn't sure what to make of it all. A few days ago, he had been an ordinary human diplomat, traveling between planets to keep peace. Now he found himself in a strange world, caught in a marriage arrangement with the granddaughters of a powerful alien leader. He glanced. Across the table at Liara and Sisera, both women had their heads bent slightly, as if lost in thought. They weren't just women, they were granddaughters of Consul Theric, the leader of Zerithia. It was hard for Jake to think of them as anything but part of the Consul's world. After all, their family held so much power, and they had been groomed for roles in the government and military. But there was more to them than just their family name. Jake had started to see that during the past few days, and he couldn't deny that he was beginning to respect them more. Sisera broke the silence first, looking at Jake with a questioning gaze. You're still wondering why this happened, aren't you? Jake nodded slowly. I can't help it. It doesn't make sense. Why would the Consul do this to his granddaughters? His voice was filled with confusion. He wasn't just thinking of himself, he was thinking about Liara and Sisera. They didn't deserve to be caught in a situation like this. Liara leaned forward, her expression serious. It's not just about us. It's marriage. It's part of a bigger plan. She paused, as if considering how much to say. See, my grandfather is not just a leader in Zerithia. He is part of a larger group of powerful figures who control much of the galaxy's politics and resources. He doesn't make decisions lightly. Every move he makes is about gaining more influence. Jake blinked in surprise. He hadn't realized the Consul's power stretched so far. This isn't just about an accident or a punishment for me. Sisara shook her head, her face filled with frustration. No, it's about something much bigger. My grandfather wants control, and he uses us as pawns to get it. This marriage is a way for him to tie Earth's influence to his own. If he can manipulate a human diplomat into marrying us, he strengthens his position. He knows the human race has growing influence in the galaxy, and he wants to make sure that influence is aligned with his own goals. Jake sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had always known politics could be messy, but this was a whole new level. He'd been used not just as an individual, but as a symbol. He was part of a strategy, not an innocent bystander. And the more he learned about the Consul's plan, the less he liked it. But what about you too? Jake asked. What do you want? This is your life too, right? Liara exchanged a brief look with Sisera, then looked back at Jake. Don't have a choice, she said quietly. We were raised to serve our family and our people. It's been drilled into us since we were children, but we're not robots. We've had our own thoughts, our own desires. We just don't have the freedom to act on them. Sisara clenched her fists in frustration. We're supposed to be symbols of power and unity, not people. This marriage, it's another way of controlling us. I want to fight it, but it's hard. The Consul holds all the power here. We're trapped. Jake listened carefully, understanding for the first time the weight these women carried. It wasn't just about the marriage. It was about family pressure, societal expectations, and the crushing sense of responsibility. They were both strong, but they were still bound by the rules set by their grandfather. I had no idea, Jake said softly. I thought this was just some punishment for my mistake. But it's so much bigger than that. Lyara nodded. It's not just your mistake. It's part of a plan that goes back generations. But the real question is, what do we do now? We can't undo the past, but we can decide what happens next. Jake felt the weight of her words. What do you mean? Sisera spoke up again. We need to stop being pawns. If we want to take control of our lives, we have to change the game. The Consul can't control everything forever. We need to find a way to free ourselves from his influence. Jake looked between the two women, trying to understand their plan. And you think I can help you with that? Lyra's gaze softened. You're part of the plan now, whether you want to be or not. But we can use that to our advantage. We can work together. Maybe we can turn the Consul's strategy against him. Jake felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a chance. He had never been someone to back down from a challenge, and this one felt like the biggest challenge of his life. But if there was a way to help these women break free of their grandfather's control, he would find it. I don't know what the future holds, Jake said, standing up, but I'm in. I'll help you. Let's figure out how we can change. The three of them stood in silence for a moment, each of them facing the unknown. But one thing was clear. Jake was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. He was part of a team, and together, they would find a way to challenge the Consul and reshape their futures. Jake Carter had never imagined he would find allies in such unexpected places. The Consul stronghold was filled with political intrigue and shadowy figures, but it was here, inside the high walls of the consulate, that Jake began to see cracks. In the system, he wasn't alone in his desire to break free from the Consul's control. There were people who were tired of living in the shadow of power. People who saw the truth behind the Consul's motives. It was during a late night meeting that Jake first encountered Tessa, a sharp-tongued Zerithian diplomat who had long been a critic of Consul Theric's methods. She had a reputation for being difficult and outspoken. But Jake quickly realized that her frustration with the Consul ran much deeper than simple disagreement. She had been trying for years to change things, to expose the darker side of the Consul's reign. But every attempt had been crushed. Jake had been invited to meet with Tessa in secret. The room was small, tucked away in one of the consulate's back corridors, hidden from the prying eyes of the Consul's guards. Tessa wasted no time in speaking her mind. You're a fool if you think you can fight the Consul head-on, Tessa said, her voice filled with frustration. I've spent my whole life trying to change things, but he's too powerful. He controls everything. Trade, politics, even the military. There's no way to defeat him without the right people. Jake didn't flinch. I'm not here to fight him directly. But I'm not going to let him control me, or the Granddaughters either. There has to be another way. Tessa looked at him, her sharp eyes studying him. You're not as naive. As you look then, good, you might have a chance, but we need to be smart about this. The Consul will destroy anyone who gets in his way. I've seen it happen. He's not someone you want to cross unless you know exactly what you're doing. Jake nodded. He had a feeling Tessa knew more about the Consul than most, and he trusted her instincts. So, what's the plan? Tessa leaned forward, her voice low. We need to gather support. People who are tired of living under his thumb. There are others, hidden in plain sight, who want change. But they're afraid. We need to make them believe that this is possible, that we can actually take him down. The plan wasn't going to be easy. They would have to move carefully, gathering allies without alerting the Consul's spies. But Jake wasn't going to back down. He had come to Zerithia to help smooth over a diplomatic mission, but now it was personal. It was no longer just about the marriage. It was about helping Liara and Sisara find their freedom. Maybe, just maybe, changing the fate of Zarithia itself in the days that followed. Jake began to see the depth of the Consul's control. It wasn't just about the Granddaughters. The Consul had woven a web of alliances with other powerful families across the galaxy, manipulating them to maintain his power. But even the most powerful people had weaknesses, and Jake knew that if they were going to succeed, they would have. To expose those weaknesses, Tessa introduced Jake to Dr. Soren. A brilliant scientist who had once worked with the Consul, but had fallen out of favor, Dr. Soren had valuable knowledge about the Consul's military strategies and the secret technologies that powered his reign. It was the key to understanding how the Consul had maintained his hold over Zarithia for so long. Dr. Soren was an odd figure, an older Zarithian with wild white hair and thick glasses that magnified his eyes. He was reclusive, his days of working with the Consul long behind him. But when Jake and Tessa explained their plan, Dr. Soren's eyes lit up with interest. "I've been waiting for someone to come along and challenge the Consul, Dr. Soren," said, his voice excited. "The technology I helped develop was never meant to be used for such control. I built weapons, yes, but I also built systems that could change the way we interact with the galaxy. There are ways to turn his own creations against him." Jake was shocked. He had no idea that the Consul's power was built on such advanced technology. The idea of using it to their advantage seemed like a long shot, but it was a shot worth taking. "I'm in," Jake said. "Oh, what do we need to do?" Dr. Soren smiled, a gleam of mischief in his eyes. "First, we need to find the key. There's a system deep inside the Consul's fortress, a control room, where all of his military technologies are monitored. If we can gain access, we can sabotage his plans and shift the balance of power. But we have to move fast." Jake, Tessa, and Dr. Soren spent the next few days planning their move. They carefully mapped out the Consul's fortress, learning the routines of the guards and the layout of the security systems. Every detail mattered. If they made one wrong move, everything could fall apart. But Jake felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in years. This was bigger than just him. This was about fighting for freedom, for Liara, Sisera, and every person under the Consul's thumb. He wasn't sure what the outcome would be, but he knew one thing: he wasn't going to give up without a fight. The night before their plan was set to begin, Jake met with Liara and Sisera in the privacy of their quarters. They were both nervous, but determined. The Consul had made his move, and now it was time to make theirs. "We're ready," Jake said, looking at the two women. "This is it. We fight tomorrow." Lyra's expression was calm, but her eyes reflected the same determination Jake had seen in her from the start. "We fight for freedom, Jake, for all of us." Sisera nodded, her voice filled with fire. "Let's make sure this isn't the last time the Consul thinks he can control us." Jake smiled. For the first time since he had arrived on Zarithia, he felt a sense of hope. They were no longer pawns in the Consul's game. They were players, and tomorrow they would make their move. The tension was palpable as Jake, Liara, Sisera, Tessa, and Dr. Soren prepared to take their first step toward freedom. They had gathered allies in the shadows, forming a quiet rebellion against the Consul's rule. Each day, Jake felt the weight of their plans growing heavier, but with each new ally, a flicker of hope burned brighter. It wasn't going to be easy. The Consul was powerful, and his influence reached far beyond Zarithia's borders. His military was vast, his control over trade was absolute, and his spies were everywhere. But Jake had learned that even the most powerful empires had cracks, and it was those cracks that they needed to exploit. The group's plan was simple, but dangerous: break into the Consul's control room, sabotage the systems that ran his military technology, and expose his true motives to the galaxy. They would strike while the Consul was distracted with his political maneuvering, and they would move swiftly, without leaving a trace. But no plan was foolproof, and they all knew that one mistake could cost them everything. Jake stood in the dimly lit chamber where they had gathered, the weight of their mission sinking in. Liara and Sisara were at his side, each of them silently preparing for what was about to happen. Tessa was busy going over the final details of their plan with Dr. Soren, who was reviewing a digital map of the Consul's fortress. The sense of urgency was thick in the air. "We've come this far," Jake said quietly, turning to face Liara. "But tomorrow, it becomes real. There's no turning back." Liara nodded, her expression determined. "We've known from the start that this was the only way forward. If we don't act now, the Consul will only grow stronger and nothing will ever change." Sisera joined them, her eyes fierce with resolve. "Tomorrow, we show the galaxy what we're really made of. We're not going to be pawns any longer." Jake felt a surge of admiration for the two women. They had been raised in the shadow of the Consul's power, trained to serve his every command. But now they were ready to fight for their own futures. He wasn't the only one who had something to prove. As the group finalized their plans, they received a surprise visitor, a trusted ally within the Consul's inner circle. Kaller, a high-ranking officer in the Consul's military, had been secretly working with Tessa for months. He had agreed to help them infiltrate the fortress, offering valuable intelligence about the security systems and the movements of the SDI. Consul's guards was a man with a deep sense of honor, and he knew the Consul's methods all too well. "I've got the latest information," Kaller said, walking into the room with a serious look on his face. "The Consul is planning a public address tomorrow. He'll be addressing the galaxy, announcing his next steps in the campaign for total control. That's our chance." Jake's eyes narrowed. "So while the Consul is busy, we'll make our move." Kaller nodded. "Exactly. His attention will be on the broadcast, and the guards will be distracted. No. But you'll have a small window to get to the control room. Once you're inside, Dr. Soren can do what needs to be done." Dr. Soren's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. "I've already prepared a device that will disrupt the Consul's control systems. It won't destroy everything, but it will disable the military tech long enough to give us the leverage we need. It's risky, but it's our only option." Jake swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "So once we've done that, we expose the Consul for what he really is." Tessa, standing beside Kaller, gave a firm nod. "We'll use the broadcast to show the galaxy the truth. The Consul has manipulated everyone, and now it's time for that to end. We'll show the galaxy that we don't need to live in fear." Jake's mind raced. He had always been a diplomat, trained to work through peaceful channels to avoid conflict whenever possible. But this was different. The Consul's reign wasn't one that could be negotiated with. It was one that needed to be dismantled. Jake didn't like the idea of violence or destruction, but he understood that sometimes the only way to change things was to take action. As the group continued their discussions, Jake couldn't help but think of what would happen after the plan succeeded. If they succeeded, the galaxy would change. The Consul's reign would crumble, and Liara and Sisera would be free to choose their own futures. But there was also the chance that they could fail. If they did, the consequences would be dire. "We have to move quickly," Kaller urged. "The Consul's broadcast will be the distraction, but it won't last long. If we wait too long, we risk losing our chance." Jake took a deep breath. "Tomorrow, then. We move tomorrow." The plan was set. Everyone had a role to play, and they all knew the stakes. If they succeeded, it would change everything. If they failed, the Consul's grip on the galaxy would tighten. It would be harder than ever to break free. That night, as Jake lay in his quarters, he couldn't sleep. The quiet of the consulate felt oppressive, like a storm was brewing just beyond the horizon. He thought about the future, about the choices that lay ahead for him, Liara, Sisera, and all the others who had joined the rebellion. Tomorrow, they would either bring hope to the galaxy or be crushed under the Consul's might. The hours passed slowly, and when morning finally came, the team was ready. The plan was in motion. Jake, Liara, and Sisera made their way to the Consul's fortress, slipping through the corridors like shadows. Tessa and Dr. Soren stayed behind, ready to act from a safe distance. Kaller would provide support from the inside, keeping an eye on the guards. The time for planning was over. Time to act. The day had arrived. Jake Carter stood outside the Consul's fortress, heart pounding in his chest. The weight of the mission hung over him like a dark cloud, but there was no turning back now. Everything had led to this moment. The plan was set, the rebellion had grown, and the consul's time in power was nearing its end. Liara, Cisara, Tessa, Dr. Soren, and Kaller were all positioned in their places, ready to execute their parts. Jake felt the eyes of the galaxy on him, even though no one else knew the rebellion was about to begin. It was an odd feeling. He had never wanted to be a hero. But now, in this moment, it was clear. His actions would either save or destroy. "Everything you okay?" Cisara's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood beside him, her eyes as sharp as ever. She was ready, but Jake could tell she was just as nervous as he was. This mission meant everything to her. Jake nodded, trying to calm himself. Just a little overwhelmed. "We're about to do something that could change everything. For you, for all of us." Cisara smiled, though there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. "I never asked for this, you know. But I won't let the Consul control me anymore. We've lived in his shadow for too long." She placed a hand on Jake's arm. "Whatever happens today, I'm glad we're doing this together." Ch felt a lump form in his throat. He had always believed in peace and diplomacy, but sometimes action was necessary. He couldn't shake the thought that this was more than just about them. This was about the future of Zirithion, the galaxy. The plan was simple: infiltrate the Consul's fortress, disable his military systems, and use the broadcast he was planning to expose him for the manipulator he truly was. The Consul would be distracted by his public address, which would give them the chance they needed. But timing was critical, and the slightest mistake could lead to disaster as they slipped through the narrow passages of the fortress. Jake's mind raced. He had learned more about the Consul's operations over the past days, and it wasn't just the control of military technology that made him dangerous. It was his ability to manipulate those around him, to make people believe they were part of a cause when in reality they were nothing more than pawns. Jake couldn't help but wonder what the Consul would say when everything was exposed. Would he fight back with everything he had? Or would the truth be enough to tear his empire apart? They reached the control room, the heart of the Consul's power. The security system was in place, but Kaller had already disabled the outer defenses. They only had one shot at this. If they failed, they would be caught, and the Consul's wrath would be unimaginable. "I'll take care of the tech," Dr. Soren whispered, his hands moving quickly over the control panel. His years of experience were evident. He knew exactly what he was doing. "I've got a device that will disable the security systems and give us control. It will only last for a few minutes." Liara and Cisara stood guard, their sharp eyes watching the corridors for any sign of movement. Every second felt like an eternity. Jake's pulse quickened as Dr. Soren worked his magic on the panel. The countdown had begun. If they were going to get out of here, they needed to move fast. The door to the control room slid open with a soft hiss, and they stepped inside, the hum of the machinery filling the air. Jake stood close to Liara and Cisara, ready for whatever came next. Dr. Soren's voice came through the silence. "It's done. Systems are down. We've got a few minutes." "Good," Jake said, his voice firm. "Let's make this count." Liara moved to the console, her hands steady as she activated the transmission system. She was calm, focused. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. "Broadcasting now," she said. "The galaxy will hear the truth." The screen flickered to life, showing the face of Consul Theric, seated in his grand chamber, preparing for his address. His cold eyes stared into the camera, unaware that his fate was about to be sealed. "This is it," Cisara said quietly, her voice tinged with determination. "Time to show the galaxy who he really is." Jake watched as Liara keyed in the final commands. The screen shifted, and instead of the Consul's prepared speech, a new message appeared, one that exposed everything. The galaxy saw images of the Consul's manipulation, his use of political power to control systems and resources, and the truth about his treatment of his own family. The secrets of his rise to power were now public knowledge, broadcast across the galaxy for all to see. The Consul's image on the screen faltered as his eyes widened in shock. He had no idea what was happening. "What is this?" The Consul's voice roared, but the broadcast had already begun. The truth was out. The manipulations, the lies, the control nothing would remain hidden now. Jake felt a surge of relief mixed with fear. They had done it. The Consul had been exposed. But there. Victory was far from guaranteed. Consul would not go down easily. They needed to leave before his forces arrived. "Time to go," Liara said, her voice steady. "We've done what we came to do." The group rushed to exit the control room, but as they moved toward the exit, they heard the sound of approaching guards. The Consul's reaction had been swift. Jake's heart raced. "We need to move, now." They ran through the hallways, dodging guards and slipping through the narrow corridors they had mapped out earlier. The fortress, once a symbol of the Consul's power, now felt like a maze of shadows and danger as they neared the escape route. They heard the Consul's voice echoing through the speakers, furious and vengeful. "You think you've won? Nothing but traitors." Jake knew this wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like they were on the right side of history. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone who had ever been oppressed by the Consul's reign. When they finally made it to safety, they didn't look back. Yes. The galaxy had seen the truth. The Consul's empire was crumbling, and for the first time in years, there was hope. Jake glanced at Liara and Cicera, their faces filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. They had done it. Together, and for the first time, Jake believed. They had a future one, where they could choose their own path, free from the shadow of the Consul.